It's January the 2nd, 2006, 6:26 a.m. at the Sago Mine in West Virginia. Brander McCloy Jr. started his shift 26 minutes ago. In a few seconds, 400,000 cubic feet of methane will detonate. Right about now. Over the next 41 hours, 13 men will fight against an invisible killer. Outdated malfunctioning equipment, bureaucratic protocols and delays, all while trapped 260 feet beneath the surface. At 6:26 a.m., a 35 kA positive lightning strike hits the ground in Upshur County. Underground, a long cable runs next to a metal wire mesh attached to the roof. Together, they form an uninsulated metallic loop. Exactly 2 seconds after the lightning strike, seismic sensors record the earth cracking underground. The methane detonates. A heavy thump shakes the soft, wet floor of the mine. But that spark was only the physical trigger. To understand why this disaster happened, we have to look at how the mine was operated. The Sago Mine was operated under the International Coal Group, ICG, led by Wilbur L. Ross Jr. ICG's business plan was straightforward: perform highly leveraged buyouts of distressed industrial assets. They bought bankrupt coal companies at auctions, used bankruptcy courts to cancel union contracts, got rid of expensive pension obligations, and worked to maximize profit margins. ICG took over Sago's previous owner and ordered extreme cuts to operational costs. Cutting these costs caused physical safety in the mine to fall apart. Production moved faster than the maintenance of the mine safety infrastructure. The regulatory framework meant to catch these problems completely failed. In 2004, the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration, MSHA, gave the Sago Mine 68 citations. In 2005, under ICG, that number jumped to 208 regulatory violations. Inspectors marked 96 of these violations as significant and substantial, SNS, meaning they were dangerous enough to likely cause serious injuries or death. Even worse, 16 of the violations in 2005 were for unwarrantable failures, the highest level of negligence in MSHA rules. No other mine its size in West Virginia had a safety record that bad. By law, MSHA had the authority to issue a pattern of violation notice. This notice would let federal inspectors to shut down parts of the mine if they found more problems. However, MSHA never gave Sago this notice. The warnings were loud, but the push for production ignored them. This carelessness led to a deadly decision: building a wall out of dense foam. Exactly 1 year before the disaster, Sago managers needed to isolate the abandoned old second left mains from the active tunnels. Rules required strong walls made out of concrete blocks or pumped cement. This meant workers had to cut deep grooves into the solid rock to anchor the walls. It was slow, hard, and very expensive. The new managers asked to use an alternative: Omega blocks. These are dense foam products. They are light, quick to deploy, and do not require heavy rock cutting. Usually favored by operators in emergency situations, such as sealing off active mine fires and not as permanent structural seal. Despite that, MSHA officially approved the request. That approval was based on a deadly regulatory flaw. At the time, MSHA regulations were based on outdated studies from the 1990s. They dictated that a structural seal only needed to withstand a static pressure of 20 pounds per square inch to be legally classified as explosion-proof. But the physics of a confined methane detonation are much stronger than 20 psi. When the 400,000 cubic feet of methane blew up, the blast expanded with terrifying violence. The explosive overpressure exceeded 50 psi and neared 100 psi. The dense foam didn't just crack, it vaporized. All 10 Omega block seeds were instantly destroyed. In just 1,000th of a second, the fire burned up all the ambient oxygen. It replaced the breathable air with nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and a growing cloud of deadly carbon monoxide. This toxic atmosphere rushed out of the old second left mains and flooded the active tunnels. 2 miles deep into the mine and 260 feet underground, the 13 men just started their shift. The blast wave hit them like a high-velocity gust of wind instead of a fireball. The sudden force ripped apart the practice walls, meant to guide fresh air into the tunnels, causing the ventilation system to violently short-circuit. It snapped their hardline communication cables, cutting the crew off the surface permanently. The explosion blew years of built-up rock dust and cold dirt off the walls and floor. The men were quickly covered in thick, blinding dust, making it impossible for their cap lamps to shine through the dark. 12 men survived the first concussive strike, but 1 man does not. Mine examiner and fire boss Terry Helms is killed directly in the blast path. Helms was the crew's main source of environmental awareness, because he carried the portable gas detector and industrial scientific model LTX 310. This tool is meant to test the ambient air and show exactly how toxic the surrounding area is. When Helms was hit by the blast, his detector fell to the dirt. Inside its plastic case, the device suffers a severe calibration failure. Its sensors completely stop reacting to methane and carbon monoxide. Without Helms and with their main detector broken, the surviving crew has no way to know what chemicals they are breathing. As the flying dirt settles, a thick, slow-moving yellow smoke fills the tunnels. Standard emergency rules dictate that the miners should immediately put on their breathing gear, but they hesitate. McCloy breathes the ambient air. He tastes rough sulfur on his throat, but he doesn't smell anything burning. Carbon monoxide has no smell, no color, and no taste. The human brain expects visible smoke to smell like fire. A few feet away, Ronald Grohl only smells dust. Because they don't smell smoke from a fire, the men think that the air is still safe. They don't put on their masks. Instead, they breathe the toxic, invisible gas right into their bodies. Soon, a pounding pressure builds behind their eyes, and a deep tiredness sinks into their muscles. Federal rules require every miner to have one self-contained self-rescuer. The company gives them the CSE Model SR100, a breathing device worn on the belt. Inside the heavy steel canister, the SR100 uses potassium superoxide, a pale yellow chemical solid held in a mesh frame. When a miner breathes into it, the moisture and carbon dioxide from their breath mix with the chemical to clean the poisoned air and make breathable oxygen. Getting this device to work involves a difficult and strict donning procedure. First, a miner must grip the heavy steel canister and tear off the metal top. Next, they must pull out the rubber breathing hose, put the mouthpiece in, and bite down. After that, they have to put spring-loaded clips tightly on their nose to stop it from breathing the smoky ambient air. Finally, their fingers must find and pull a small fabric actuator tag. This tag opens a starter oxygen cylinder that inflates the breathing bag while the chemical reaction warms up. This is exactly what the 12 men had to do in the dark. Looking around, McCloy realizes that at least 4 units are given zero oxygen. The trapped men pass the few working units back and forth to stay alive, but every time they trade, they breathe in huge amounts of the invisible poison. Section Foreman, Martin Toller, thinks for a moment. The escape routes are cut off by massive amounts of toxic gas. He gives an order: fall back to the working phase of the mine. Years ago, federal rules ordered mines to build tough, oxygen-filled safety chambers. However, the government never enforced this rule. The crew has no steel bunker to hide in, so they have to build their own shelter out of thin plastic. The men use brattice curtains, a flexible plastic sheet that was used to guide airflow into the mine. They drag 29 feet of the plastic diagonally across the tunnel, stretching it from one wall to the other. The hard work consumes what little oxygen they have left. By doing this, they trap an air volume of roughly 15,350 to 23,800 cubic feet. They step behind the plastic and seal the edges tightly against the wall. Inside their plastic bubble, all electronic communication lines are dead. The miners have to rely on acoustic signaling. They take turns swinging heavy sledgehammers upward, hitting the steel bolt stuck in the low ceiling. They hope the steady banging will travel through 260 feet of solid rock and be picked up by seismic sensors on the surface. But their efforts does not work. The Brattis curtains is highly permeable, meaning air easily passes through it. The heavy carbon monoxide leaks right through the plastic weave. As hours pass, the working SCSR units run out of air. The pounding pressure in their heads gets worse, and the deep lethargy takes over their muscles. The sledgehammer is too heavy now. The men slump against the cold walls, and the rescue team isn't anywhere near the mine. Federal regulations allow mine operators to contract out their emergency rescue teams. Keeping a fully equipped rescue team on the property every single day is very expensive. The International Coal Group uses this contractor model to cut their operating costs. Because of this financial choice, when the explosion cuts the communication lines, there is no rescue team waiting on the surface. Precious hours are lost while the company waits for trained men to drive to the mine from all over the county. When the teams finally arrived, they put on their heavy closed-loop breathing gear and get ready to go into the mine. However, the acting MSHA Deputy Assistant Secretary, Bob Friend, stops them from going in. The mine's atmospheric monitoring system is still using electrical power, and the tunnels are filled with explosive methane gas. A single spark from those electrical monitors could cause a secondary detonation and burn the rescuers alive. Because of this extreme danger, the rescue teams are ordered to take off their gear and back away. The engineers then switch to a surface extraction strategy. They try to drill a hole straight down through 260 feet of solid rock. The drill goes deep into the earth, but just as it gets close to the roof of the mine, the operators suddenly turn off the power. The drill bit they are using doesn't have water circulation capabilities. Pushing a dry, extremely hot metal drill into a pocket of methane is a huge ignition risk. The friction heat from the drill could easily cause another explosion. The rescuers have to go inside. However, the underground environment makes it incredibly difficult. The men are wearing bulky equipment that makes it hard to see and move. The floor is made of soft clay. On top of this physical struggle, bureaucratic protocols slows them down even more. The MSHA Command Center directives require a strict rule. For every rescue team working deep inside the mine, there must be an equal number of backup teams sitting safely at the fresh air base. Experienced rescuers argue with the MSHA officials, begging them to move faster to save the miners, but command forces them to hold back. By 11:40 p.m. on January the 3rd, exactly 41 hours have passed since the explosion. The rescue team reaches the end of the tunnel. Jimmy Klug sees a plastic Brattis curtain pulled tightly across the rough cold wall. Inside the plastic shelter, Klug and his team look at the dirt floor and see the miners laying completely still against the cold walls. Desperate to find anyone alive, the rescuers move quickly from person to person, shaking their shoulders and calling out in the dark. One rescuer grabs the shoulders of a miner who has already passed away and quickly pulls him away from the wall. This sudden, rough movement squeezes the dead man's chest cavity. The air trapped deep inside the man's lungs is forced up through his throat. This makes the body let out a loud, clear moan. The rescuer jumps back, and his adrenaline takes over. Right next to that body, Render McCloy Jr. takes a very weak breath. The rescuer now thinks he has found two living men. Because the wired phones are broken, the rescue team is barely within range to communicate. To send messages to the surface, they have to create a fragile chain of 4 people. The first person is a rescuer inside the barricade, trying to shout through a thick rubber face mask into a radio. The second person is Kelvin Jolly, who is standing hundreds of yards away. Jolly has to run back and forth just to catch the weak radio signal. The third person is Chris Lilly, standing at the fresh air base with a working phone line. The final stop is the command center on the surface. The rescuer grabs his radio and yells that they need help. They found the man and they need stretchers for 2 people who are alive, but they quickly realize their mistake about the first body. The thick rubber masks muffle the rescuers' voices, and the radio static chops up their words. At the fresh air base, Chris Lilly presses the radio against his ear, but the sound is a mess. What Lilly thinks he hears is a request for supplies, oxygen, stretchers, and the phrase 12 alive. He turns straight to the wired phone and yells that exact message up to the surface. At 11:46 p.m., someone in the command center writes this down, officially logging that 12 people are alive. Outside the mine, hundreds of tired family members are waiting in the freezing cold at the Sago Baptist Church. This unchecked rumor immediately skips past the official leaders. 500 friends and relatives rush outside into the freezing midnight cold, crying and hugging each other. The church bells ring loudly across the valley, and the crowd begins to sing Amazing Grace. Governor Joe Manchin, caught up in the mass euphoria, cornered Randall McClaw's junior wife, hugged her, and said, "I told you miracles happen in West Virginia." Meanwhile, deep inside the command center, the real truth finally comes through. A new radio message crackles over the speaker from underground. The rescue team says they have 1 man on a stretcher and 11 items. The word items is a strict code word used to stop families and reporters listening on police scanners from hearing brutal details about dead bodies. The officials on the surface freeze. They argue with the rescuers and demand to know exactly what the team means. A frustrated official yells to stop using the code words. They ask if they mean there are 11 survivors and 1 dead body. The rescue team answers, saying no, it is the exact opposite. The room goes completely quiet. The International Call Group CEO, Ben Hatfield, waits for more than 90 minutes before he goes out to face the crowd. When the rescue team searched the bodies, they found pieces of scrap paper. In their final moments of consciousness, the dying men left their last words for their loved ones. George Hamner drove shuttle cars through those tunnels for 26 years. He left a note on a 3x5-inch piece of lined paper. Written over 8 hours after the explosion, the text read, "Hi, Deb and Sarah. I'm still okay at 2:40 p.m. I don't know what's going on between here and outside. We don't hear any attempts at drilling or rescue. The section is full of smoke and fumes, so we can't escape. I love you both and always have. I'm in no pain, but don't know how long the air will last." Martin Toller, the section foreman, left a note that reflected a profound, almost eerie acceptance of their fate as the hypoxia induced a lethargic drift into unconsciousness. His scrawled message read, "Tell all I see them on the other side. It wasn't bad, I just went to sleep. I love you." James Bennett attempted to write a final note at 4:25 p.m., 10 hours after the blast. He managed to write, "I love you," but lost consciousness and died before he could finish spelling his daughter's name. Once the rescue operation ended, the administrative audit begins, and the cost of 12 lives must be paid for. The Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration evaluates the broken debris. Inspectors document the vaporized foam walls and the broken breathing gear. The agency then issues a financial penalty to the International Call Group, demanding $134,000 for 13 specific regulatory violations that directly led to the disaster. The corporation fights this assessment in court. Gerald Feldman is the judge for the case. After reviewing the safety citations, he makes his ruling and reduces the penalty down to just $71,800. Judge Feldman completely removes 4 of the violations from the record. He then looks at 5 other citations and officially removes their unwarrantable failure designation. Removing this label clears the corporation of a severe administrative liability, keeping their overall financial penalty as low as possible. The court finalizes the fine, but people still argue over what physically caused the spark. The official federal investigation blames a weather anomaly. However, the United Mine Workers of America conduct their own investigation. The union rejects the government's conclusion. They argue that electrical current needs a direct conductive conduit to travel through solid rock. Instead, they point to friction happening at the extraction phase. The union theory blames the explosion on poor equipment maintenance. Despite this argument, The federal courts dismissed the union's analysis, and the lightning strike remains the official, documented cause of the explosion. With the legal battles over, public anger forces politicians to look at how weak the current safety rules are, leading Congress to step in. The federal government creates the Mine Improvement and New Emergency Response Act of 2006, also known as the Miner Act. This new law directly targets the specific failures that happened at Sago. The government places a permanent ban on using omega blocks for structural walls. They rewrite the engineering rules and completely throw out the outdated 20 psi limit. Now, a structural steel must prove it can survive explosive overpressures ranging from 50 to 120 psi. The new law also fixes the failure of the CSE SR100 breathing units. Giving miners only a single 1-hour oxygen canister is ruled unsafe. Now, mine operators must hide extra breathing equipment at specific distances along all marked escape routes. The slow rescue response is also addressed. While this legislation updates the safety rules, it cannot change the tragic loss of those 12 lives.